Hello, my friend. This is Heather. This is the Back to Me podcast. And this week's amazing celebrity, first of all, happy almost end of the year. But this week's amazing celebrity is Isabelle Griffith. And you will be able to tell from the conversation that we could have kept talking and talking and talking. We were having such a great conversation. And we're talking about embodied feminine leadership. But really, what we're talking about is what it means to be okay and solid as you as a person, and how that can actually ripple outwards and create everything that you want in the world. Have a listen and absolutely let me know what you think. Take care, my friend. Have a good day. Hi, my friends. Welcome. This is the Back to Me podcast, and this is Heather, and I am super excited that you're here. You are going to hear some tips and some tricks and some ideas to help you live your happiest and healthiest self. I call it Back to Me because when you are taking care of yourself, back to me, then you can take better care of others, and we can all make the world a better place. This is Wellness Your Way, and I am super happy that you're here. Hello, my friend. How are you? I hope you're having an outstanding day. 2022 is winding down. Hard to believe, but there it is. It happens to everybody. And this is another amazing celebrity chat with an awesome human being. So we're going to close out the year with an amazing human, Isabelle Griffith, and we are going to talk about some pretty awesome stuff today. It says embodied feminine leadership in the notes, but I'm sure it will go all over the place. So welcome, Isabelle. It's so nice to meet you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Heather. I've been really looking forward to our conversation.
Yes, I know we always have an early conversation to make sure that we are on the same page. And then I can't wait to reconnect with all of these people. It's so great. So you are it's so interesting, your program. So I wanted you to talk. Well, first, let's talk about how did you find your way into this this program that you're offering, or this kind of concept?
Yeah. I think so. Before I did the work that I do, so I'm an emotional resilience and embodied feminine leadership coach and facilitator. But before I did this, it is, isn't it? And you might, I think as the conversation goes, you might understand more about why I really want to mention both, because to me these two go hand in hand. But let's see how things unfold.
All right.
But before I got to this work, I was in the corporate world for over 20 years. And at some point during that time, I was managing large teams, people located in Southeast Asia, in the US. I myself am in London, in Europe. And so I was feeling spread very thinly. I was juggling having young children with managing my work life and having the impact that I wanted to have at work. And at some point, to cut a long story short, I ended up burning out. And I think to really illustrate that journey, maybe it helps to take us back to that moment in time for me where it was probably, I think most of us have this pit moment. And for me, that pit moment was sitting on a little bench outside my house on a weekday. It was a beautiful autumn day, and our house is a cul-de-sac. So it's very, our road is a cul-de-sac. It's very quiet. And I'm sure that I looked as the perfect picture of serenity. I was drinking a cup of tea, sitting there by myself. Anyone passing by would have thought, oh, what a lovely thing to do. But actually what was happening for me at that time was as far from that as you can imagine. My mind felt like a prison that I couldn't escape from. It was filled with harsh, critical, judgmental thoughts. I felt more anxious than I'd ever been before, to the point where just functioning through the day felt difficult. I would go to the post office and be told that they'd run out of stamps, and that was enough to send me on a downward emotional spiral for the rest of the day, which is really, you're no longer in this sort of high functioning anxiety there. You're really no longer functioning very well. And I was exhausted, numb. I was encountering all sorts of things during my day that I thought that should make me happy, but I couldn't really feel anything. And I was looking at my life and thinking, I've been ticking all the boxes for how to be happy. And yet here I am on this bench, feeling broken, feeling flawed, and wondering, how do I move forward? Because if ticking all these boxes has led me to where I am now, what's the way forward, really? How do you move from what you thought was the perfect recipe or the perfect blueprint? And so the following few years was really a journey of putting myself back together, myself personally, my life. And that has led me at the time to really lean into yoga, which I know you also teach. That then led me to mindfulness. And those two modalities were so critical to my recovery, really fundamental. And so I trained as a yoga teacher and then a mindfulness and self-compassion practitioner. And from there, I then started to learn various modalities of coaching, because I would have people coming to me in my yoga classes and, pouring their hearts out and saying, can you help? Because as you might know, when we start moving into the body, these emotions sometimes get released and they might come up. And so I felt ill-equipped. And so I would say my journey has been quite organic, really moving from one thing to the next and really uncovering more and more. And now most recently, I've really been delving into embodiment and somatics. So this is where I am today. And really what I'm passionate about is helping women who are where I was all those years ago, feeling stressed, feeling anxious, feeling overwhelmed, trying to juggle all the things, deprioritizing their self-care and feeling like they're slowly becoming more and more extinguished, and allowing them to return home to their bodies, to reconnect with themselves, what gives them joy, and to have the impact that they want to have within their families, within their communities, their workplaces, but without having to sacrificing the whole of who they are, which is what often society teaches us to do, particularly as women.
And it's so true. We have had very similar, right?
Yeah,
We've both hit the wall in corporate and turned to yoga. So,
yeah.
and it's so interesting that, I mean, the similarities between the people, like having experienced it myself, it's like you are doing all the things that they tell you are the things that you need to be doing to have success, the in
Mhm.
quotation marks success. And when you get there and you realize, oh, this isn't what it was supposed to feel like, or this isn't good. I mean, my lowest day was the day that I was driving home and I drove through a red light and I didn't know
Mhm.
until there was a pedestrian in front of me. And I was yelling at the pedestrian. And I looked up and I was like, "Oh my god, my light is red." I should have died. Like, I probably would have hit the pedestrian, but because of the intersection I was in, I should have been hit driving through this red light. But thankfully, I didn't hit anyone and they didn't hit me. But it was a very much this isn't the way the world is supposed to be if you're happy and successful, right?
Mm.
The
Mm.
external the external trappings of success are not always the internal. They don't tell you what the internal, how to feel success internally. So
Absolutely.
how long do you, because some people will think, oh, I'll just do this and I'll feel better. But it takes a while to come back, doesn't it? How long did you find that it took you to find your
That's a
way?
really good question. It took me quite some time, and I think what's important to focus on, and it was for me, is really those moments where you feel at ease, where you feel good, where you feel at home in yourself and in your body, and just following them like breadcrumbs, and knowing that, maybe for the first few weeks or months, that might happen for a couple of hours a week, maybe one. But then it kind of grows organically. And it's really a process of trusting ourselves, trusting our bodies, and trusting the path. So for me, when I started this recovery process, the only moment in my week where I felt at ease with myself, and I could be myself, and that was enough, and that was okay. And I didn't feel completely flawed or broken was when I was on my yoga mat. And it felt like that, perhaps the yoga mat itself, that object, was really an anchor to step on and to say, here I'm enough. And so for me, it was that 1 hour a week to begin with. And, the rest of the time was pretty hard. But I think you follow that spark and you start to, build a little bit more resilience. Every time you step on your mat, you start to feel a little bit more ease. And little by little, your whole system, your body, your mind, your heart orients towards more calm, more grounding, and then that ease becomes more natural. So it's really this process of creating new neural pathways, rewiring your brain to experience life differently and to sense safety in your body, because ultimately burnout is a nervous system piece. It's too little or too much for too long, and our nervous system has been in chronic stress for so long that eventually the body shuts down. And so we need to slowly signal that sense of safety back to our body and our system, and activate that parasympathetic nervous system to signal calm and come back to a place of ease. And to begin with, we're just changing our state in those moments. So to begin with, I was just feeling a little bit calmer, a little bit more grounded on my yoga mat. But that resourced me for the rest of the week, and it took time for me to feel that sense of resourcing outside of the mat. So I would say it probably took me 3 years to be fully recovered. And I don't think you ever forget that experience. I mean, it sounds like your experience of burnout was as severe as mine, and that always stays in your body. It's imprinted somewhere in your body. And so I'm really conscious of this as I live. So I would say, yes, I don't feel like I'm burnt out anymore. And I live differently. I'm really hyper aware of these early warning signs. And I live very deliberately to never go back to that place,
Right.
because, I think we need that scaffolding to hold us, to be able to sustain ourselves in a world that is forever on. We need to find the off button within ourselves.
And it's true. If we allow it, you could go and go, and the world would just wring you out. I mean,
Yeah.
I talked to a coach, I think a couple of months ago, called the Nope Coach. So she was in Australia about having those boundaries and like the saying no and being okay that you're saying no. And it is true that you keep all those experiences and those memories, especially intensely, the ones that are intense. And as you were as we were talking, I was just thinking about conversations that I've had with clients. Not all of it has to be extreme burnout.
No.
You can just need everyone just needs a place to be restful and to feel okay. And I've been talking to some clients who, when I ask the question, "What makes you happy?" they don't know,
Mm-hmm.
which I find so heartbreaking. So heartbreaking that
Yeah.
you don't know anymore what makes you happy. So then it's trying to untangle, like, come at it another way, like, do you remember ever being happy? Can you touch that memory and have that experience again? And then patiently patience, we have to have patience,
Mm-hmm.
which we don't have a lot of these days, and being curious and open to the letting it come back in.
Yeah.
Did you ever find yourself impatient with yourself to, "Come on, let's get going." Type A personalities, "I can get these reports done in 5 days. Why can't I get this done?"
That rings so true to me. I know you were in finance. I was in audit, so I'm very
Yes.
much spreadsheets, numbers. I was very rational, and I've almost run my life like that, where things had to be a certain way. So yes, I think I was. See, I think what leads us to these moments where we think something has to change is a desire for parts of us to disappear, or, you know, for me, the tired part, the part that was weak, the part that was not good enough. You know, I just wanted that part to go away. And so what leads us to creating change is, I think, often a desire to get rid of the unpleasant. And what happens as we go through this journey is really a process of holding these parts with a lot of compassion and a lot of tenderness and a lot of love, and, you know, understanding their motivations and their needs. So yes, at the beginning there's this impatience of, you know, A, B, C, D, you know, what's the process that it needs to, you know, I need to get from A to B, and I need to do that as quickly as possible. And through the unpicking of all of this, I think we become much more patient with ourselves and with others. And I think it's, again, as we become more patient with ourselves, more compassionate with ourselves, that ripples across everyone we touch. So yes, to the impatience to begin with, and the fixing mindset of, I need to fix myself, just put me back together. I almost don't care how, or, you know, what will happen, but I just need to pick my life back where it was and carry on. And then you realize that that isn't going to be the case. And
And it wasn't sustainable to start with.
no, of
So
course not. Of course not. You know, I often talk, and you've alluded to this, about three key characteristics, I guess, of our society, as you were talking about women feeling disconnected from their own happiness, or what gives them joy, or what they even want. And I talk about it being thinking oriented. So we always in our heads, and we overvalue cognitive processes, you know, the evaluating, the strategic thinking, the analyzing, all of the things that we've been used to working
that's what
in
we're taught
finance
to do.
before.
We're
Absolutely.
rewarded
And
for that, and you're taught that, and that's the way the world works.
absolutely. And if you think
And
of young children, you know, they're in kindergarten, and it's all about play and really being in their bodies and feeling. And then little by little, we kind of chip away at that until the point where you become an adult, you work in the corporate world, and suddenly you detach from your feeling body, from the sensations, because we up here and we think our way through life rather than being engaged within it. And then we wonder, why does it feel so dry? Why does it lack richness? The other piece is really, it's doing focused or doing oriented, where we are valued most when we're productive, when we create, when we're efficient. And if we, you know, if we feel tired or exhausted, and we think, "Oh, I just can't be doing more, I'm just exhausted," then rather than questioning that model of being, we question ourselves, and then we go on this quest of, I need to be fixed, I need to be doing more, how can I be more productive? And then we outwardly oriented, and we constantly distracted. We're distracted by our phones, we're distracted by the media that comes at us all the time. Many of us are either people pleasers, so we just seek, and you alluded to that earlier, that validation from the outside to
mhm.
feel good. You know, we want to be helpful, and it comes from a really beautiful place, but we are willing to give even when we are empty. Or we're the strong one, which I also was really part of my narrative. I'm the strong one, you know, I just hold everything and everyone together, but underneath all of that, I'm crumbling. And so when we think about those three pieces, it's no wonder that when we're thinking, when we're constantly doing, and when we're outwardly focused, we forget to be in ourselves. You know, everything goes outwardly or up. So we forget our body. And if we are not in tune with our bodies, we're not in tune with our emotions, with our feelings, with the sensations. You know, if you think of eating a beautiful meal, it's like these flavors in your mouth and the sensations that the food gives you. We can't really be fully attuned to that. And so over time, we're very attuned to what everybody else needs, what our workplaces need, what we need, but we forget what we need, or even who we are. Like for me, it was a case of, I don't recognize this person. I
Oh,
don't know who I am.
right. And it's true that you spend so much of your energy on everyone else. And because I'm also a massage therapist, one of the things that I'll tell my clients is your body will tell you if you
Yeah,
ask it and if you pay attention. But if you're not listening, the only vehicle it has to tell you anything is pain.
yeah,
And, because people will say, "Why does this hurt so much?" And I try to kindly say to them, "It's been there a long time. You just weren't listening, so it started shouting."
yeah. Absolutely. That's so important because, the body is always talking, but we hear it like a distant radio in the background, and we're not really paying attention until there's an illness or a diagnosis or a burnout. There's 12 stages to burnout. It's a process of slow erosion. And yet often we wake up when we're at stage 9 or 10. So there's opportunities to kind of sense something isn't quite right. And I think that's part of what we develop once we've been there, is the sense, ooh, something isn't quite right. But because we're not tuned into our bodies, we don't hear those signals. We just don't sense it. And then we end up ill or with, pains, as you said.
You end
Or
up so
burning
far
out.
down that it's harder to get back,
Yeah,
right? And I will say that I know that yoga is not everyone's vehicle to come
no,
back to themselves. You and I just happen to really like yoga.
yeah,
So
yeah,
and even when I say that to people, I will say there are so many kinds of yoga and ways to practice mindful movement. I mean, these days I teach a yoga and fusion of Tai Chi that I think is
mhm,
beautiful and flows so lovely. So there's always a way to find a way into your body. It's just being able to
yeah,
experiment and see what
yeah,
happens, right?
yeah, absolutely. For me, it's not until years later that I was able to say, yoga was helpful to me and so supportive because I was in my body. At the time I didn't know why, but I thought this feels so good. It feels like that exhale that I really needed. But I couldn't articulate that until much later. And I realized it was just being in our body. But being with our body or starting to practice a little bit more of embodiment can also just be soothing touch, self holding, or just touching our lips, placing hands on our heart. One of my clients was saying to me, she went to the beach and put cream on her body, and that was a moment for her of just realizing, I have a body, and I don't mean that as a, oh, look, there's arms. I mean that as a, wow, I can feel my body. So it can be that. It can be taking a few deep breaths and really noticing the sensations of our breath in our body. It can be dancing, particularly sort of intuitive dance, 5 rhythms, all these kinds of
Oh,
just
yes.
moving, and not so much moving in the interest of movement, but moving in the interest of noticing how that feels. And also maybe just allowing our body to move how we want it to move. So maybe there's tension in the neck. Oh, it would feel good to do this, rather than being directed in our movement. So there's lots of it. Shaking is a great way of getting into the body. Cold water, so cold showers, because that really gives you a sensation, a wake up. So
Ooh,
there's
it's
lots of
winter. You
ways.
want to take a cold shower.
Yeah,
Ah.
I'm not really one for cold showers, if I'm honest, because I feel the cold really badly. I've tried, and I'll do it for 5 minutes, but you can see, when you're in that shower and the cold water is sort of falling on your body, there's this moment of for me anyway, where and it is a stress response. And so if you are able to notice and to breathe through it and to let it be, you're really training your body and your mind, your brain, your nervous system to better cope with stress, because it's a small stress reaction. So all these different ways. Tai Chi, I know, is so powerful too. I think it's that sense of mindfulness is important, of being curious about how it feels, but it can take many different shapes. And one that I always suggest to my clients, which I think is really simple, is taking a pause 3 times a day, putting a reminder on your phone, and when the phone rings, taking a few breaths, really noticing the flow of the breath in the body, and then asking ourselves, how am I feeling? How am I really feeling? Am I thirsty? Am I hungry? Am I cold? And what do I need? And just that is a good start to start saying, I'm going to pause and deliberately I'm going to listen to that radio signal in the background. I'm
Right.
going to tune into that rather than all of this. Yeah.
And what is I think of a couple of things. So when I'm teaching yoga, what my opening is, we just are quiet for the beginning of the class, and I always invite people to press pause on their day, give themselves permission to press pause, give themselves permission to be there, and to turn on their inner eyeballs so that they can,
That's
it's like
beautiful.
visualizing turning on like the lights inside to see what's happening.
Yeah.
Because and if you practice it, I mean, I imagine your clients when they first start, they sit there and it's hard to step away sometimes from what you're doing. I always remind people that a pause doesn't mean, oh, it's time to check social media. you know, oh, I don't have to work for a few minutes. I can go check my Instagram. But when you do have that pause and you ask yourself, I imagine that in the beginning, sometimes there's no answer because you don't
Yeah.
know the language,
Yeah. Yeah.
and not to be
Absolutely.
hard on yourself for that,
Yes.
just to keep asking.
Yeah. And self-compassion throughout, we talked about patience before, but self-compassion, I think, is the key skill and the key piece to really nurture and cultivate. And that's really difficult to start with because we often come from that place of judgment, judgment for not keeping up, judgment for being not good enough, and so on and so forth. So the self-compassion is huge. And you're right, some of my clients, when we start working together, just sitting and breathing for a few minutes is too much. They are so activated in their nervous system that feels really uncomfortable. And so sometimes just a soothing touch is, and really noticing the sensations is a better way of regulating. It really depends on where we are, and it's a journey, as you said, so it needs to be held tenderly, I think.
I had a yoga teacher who I was studying with. This was a long time ago, so it was probably like 18 years ago, who said that, and this was before we hit this place where there is all as much there was even social media then. I don't even think Facebook was around yet. But she made a comment that we've created a society that is almost like Disneyland,
Yeah,
and you need constant entertainment and stimulation, and it has to keep,
yeah.
it's like a drug. You need to keep upping it and upping it and upping it and upping it, and you don't know how anymore to find a quiet space.
No,
And,
no.
like, it sounds almost like for some of your clients, that quiet space is a stressful place
Yes,
because they don't know
yeah,
how to be there.
yeah.
They don't know what to do with
Yeah,
themselves.
yeah. It's absolutely that, absolutely that. And so this is also why it's starting really small, And again, maybe it's taking that pause and, oh, I can feel my feet on the ground. And today that's enough. And that's okay. Because when we've been dysregulated in our nervous system for so long, and we've been through that erosion or even just chronic stress, it's not a hop back and there we are back where we started. It's little hops, and it's a path that takes a little bit longer. And of course, being still is really unfamiliar. It only takes looking at what happens when we stand in a supermarket queue or at the doctor's surgery waiting for our turn. The first instinct that most of us have is picking up our phone and turning on the entertainment, because we cannot bear the feeling of being with ourselves, because then we really have to acknowledge, oh, my neck hurts, oh, I'm feeling anxious today, or I have this, thing going on later today, and that's quite stressful, or I have this report to write. And so we have lost the ability to feel and to be with our emotions. And it's a skill we need to relearn. And that takes a little bit of time.
And processing emotions is not something we're necessarily born knowing how to do, right? And it does take practice. But sometimes I feel like we have this feeling like we should already know how to do everything and we should be perfect.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Right? Why
Yeah.
don't I know how to do this?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, and it's interesting to just question where that comes from, because again, if we think about when we were younger, we didn't really question our ability to walk. We fell down a million times, and then one day our legs were strong enough to carry us for a few more steps. And then over time, again, there's this sense that we need to know everything, that it should be a part of the software that we installed, that's installed within us. And that's almost growth mindset is something to cultivate too. Even though I don't know how, I'm willing to explore, I'm willing to be shown. And that's a big mindset shift when we are valued and recognized on what we project on the outside, the efficiency, the perfectionism, and all of these things. It takes being humble and vulnerable to recognize that sometimes we don't know, and we need to learn new skills.
So maybe, and this just came to me just as you were talking. So I guess admitting you don't know something may make you feel powerless. So there's a
Mhm.
power dynamic. So you telling someone that you don't know something gives them the power, or you feel like it gives them the power because you've you've viewed the power as being outside of you. The power is something out there to be attained versus it's actually already in you. You just don't know how to tap through that,
Yeah, yeah. And for me, the bridge is curiosity.
right?
It's just learning to be curious, learning to maybe not have the answer as it's usually structured, which is, here's the question, and 15 steps later, here's the answer. But to be curious about the process, and to know that if we're curious, we will get to, I mean, I'm almost reluctant to call it an answer, but
And
a place,
understanding.
well, yeah, a place of understanding and clarity. So it's not so much, particularly when we start, becoming more embodied, it's not so much about finding the answer. It's about, can I be curious? And it's about asking ourselves different questions. So rather than saying, what's the world is this and that and the other, what's going to happen? It's about turning that eyeball, as you called it, back inwards and saying, well, how can I resource myself to be able to cope with whatever happens on the outside? Instead of saying, how can I deliver that presentation perfectly? It's turning back again and being curious about, why is it important to me to deliver this perfectly? What does the part of me that wants to deliver this perfectly need to feel safe in just being themselves? So it's a curiosity and asking ourselves different questions that are maybe more heart-based. And really, I think that's, partly the way of embodied feminine leadership is really returning to our bodies and becoming curious and having sort of, I guess, orienting towards qualities that are not so much about control, about perfectionism, about fixing and finding answers, but it's more about compassion, it's more about curiosity, it's more about finding flow rather than being always on. It's adopting different ways of being, living, and leading. And it takes a dismantling of all the conditioning that we carrying in our bodies from the society we live in, and a reclamation of the parts of us that we've ignored or pushed aside, ignored their needs, because we were orienting towards that success blueprint that you alluded to earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And as
Mm-hmm.
we start dismantling all that and reclaiming the parts of us that we've exiled, we start to reconnect to our desires and what gives us happiness. And we start to question the blueprint and say, does this work for me? If I'm at the end of my life looking back, what would a life well lived look like? And to some extent, I think the pandemic has led us to asking ourselves more of these questions. And we then need to really have that courage and that care and commitment to make the changes that we need to make to live a life that feels true and meaningful to ourselves. And that takes a lot of courage because we are swimming upstream, you know.
Yes. Yeah.
Mm.
Uh, a recent podcast I did was, bring a friend.
Mm.
because there are times when that kind of journey, when you decide to embark on a journey like that and you're commit to it, there are going to be days that you think, what was I thinking? You
Yeah,
know, can I go back? Because even if though it wasn't a good place, you knew it and you knew the rules there. When you go into somewhere where you're trying to change something, that's also has its own kind of discomfort to it. So,
yeah,
finding a place like I mean, it's community or a support, or I mean, that's what I mean. I see that a lot of that's what coaching is, helping support someone as they're trying to change something. And I was thinking about what was I thinking about? It's gone out of my head. That
oh,
thought.
it might come back,
It
but
might come back. That's
but
okay. It
I
happens to me all the
really,
time.
it happens to me all the time as well, so I'm very familiar with that feeling. But I think the point you're making about community is really important. And for myself, I'm part of different communities, and I'm mentored as well, because um, because to keep that commitment and to really keep that that different way of being and living, we need to be surrounded with people who are on the same path to some extent. Now, I'm not suggesting that either we, pack everything up and go live as a shepherdess somewhere in the mountains, although that could be really nice, so that we cut ties with all of our friends or communities. Absolutely not. What I'm suggesting is that being in community with people who are sharing this worldview or desiring something different and are almost activists in their way of that reclamation and dismantling is really important to keep us marinating in that juice, let's say,
Yes.
because otherwise it's so easy to kind of be sidetracked again by the current. The current is constantly there, constantly taking us, and so it takes some anchoring, and we can anchor in ourselves, but anchoring in a community feels so supportive. So I think that's a huge piece
And
to
a lot of our reactions and ways of being and conditioning are just a habit. We've just formed a habit. And if you've ever tried to change a habit, like, I don't know, trying to get off chocolate, I haven't fixed that. I haven't fixed it. It's not to be fixed. I haven't altered that habit yet, but it's changing a habit. You sometimes needs, yeah, have some help along the way to help you change some habits. And it does take that time to shift those things. And
yeah,
we've reached a world of instant gratification where I can order something this afternoon and have it in my hands tomorrow from across the world. Like, who knows even where it's going to come from? It'll just plop onto my doorstep. So we've in some ways we've forgotten how to wait, how to be
yeah,
patient, how to observe. And this came to me about sitting in a doctor's office and waiting for your appointment. And I don't remember if we talked about this last year. Yes, 2021, October 2021, I had a stroke and
mm,
it affected my vision. So I couldn't see my phone, and it was COVID. So I couldn't have any visitors. So I was alone with no escape for 4 days
mm,
to sit with myself luckily I had been practicing it for years to sit with myself and be quiet and observe, asking my body, "Are you okay? What do you need? How can I help you?" Those things. And some people will say to me, "Oh, it's so terrible you had a stroke." And I mean, I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but oh my goodness, it was such a huge learning for me. And I came out of it with so much. I mean, I say the universe needed to kick me in the bum really
Mhm.
hard without a lot of permanent damage. And that was how it chose to do it. It's like, she needs a wake up call. Let's go. Boom.
Mm. What would you say your biggest learning or insight was? Because that's, that's a really significant experience.
That one is trust. So I had to trust that I was in the right place. When I first got there, I was doing that typical thing. No, 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 just let me go home. I'm fine. Because I
Mm.
considered myself very healthy. I am very healthy. So it's that denial is no, no, you're crazy. You don't know what you're talking about. But then somehow I stepped out of myself and I said, what are you doing? You're in one of the best medical facilities for what's happening to you, which happens to be down the road from me. These people are caring for you and they're being so kind to you, even though you're acting like a crazy person. So, so stop arguing with them. So one of the biggest things was I learned to surrender to what was going on, but it didn't mean I had to give up where I wanted to go. So I ultimately knew I was going to be fully recovered. I was going to be back home and I was going to continue my journey. But in that moment, I needed to stop fighting. So it was like a big exhale.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I just sat quietly for, 3.5 days because they didn't have a bed in the ward. So I had to stay in the emergency room and it was Halloween and there was crazy things
Oh,
happening around me. So I was just very quiet and I turned on my observer and I just sat and breathed and rested and waited to see what else was going to happen.
and what was because I think that's a really important point, that surrender. And again, it's, I think part of this learning and this journey is the learning to surrender. How did that change how you felt within yourself? Just
You
that,
when you
that
do Yeah, when you finally have that recognition, it does feel like that big exhale and you can just feel everything turn down.
yeah,
That fighting is your shoulders are up and you're clenched and stressed. And
yeah,
when you say okay, and you just all your stress goes. I mean, I
yeah,
still had a monster headache, but they had things to help me with that. And I just it felt like I could just rest,
yeah,
right? I
and
can
be,
just rest here. I can
yeah,
just rest here and I'm fine. And there's
yeah,
nothing I need to be doing. Stop
yeah,
doing. This is not a doing time. It was
no,
a big stop doing notification.
yeah. But and again, that's I think it's such a, an unfortunate and terrible event, and a beautiful illustration of what we can do without passing through that. Because I think a huge part of what creates that stress, that tension, the anxiety, and maybe the burnout is being in resistance to what's happening, and so badly wanting to control it, because it helps us to feel safe, to
Yeah.
know that we're in charge. And learning to loosen our grip, as you were saying, going from there to, even in our bodies, just doing this and that, it just feels entirely different. I
Mhm.
think it's a huge part of what we need to learn.
And you can't
Of
control those situations.
course you can't. It
So, you're just causing yourself problems trying to.
Absolutely, and it's all that secondary suffering in mindfulness. You're probably familiar with the primary and the secondary suffering. The primary suffering is, I'm in pain, I've suffered a stroke, my body is in pain, perhaps I'm not seeing well, and all of these things are happening in my body. And the secondary suffering is all these layers we add on top, which is, I don't want this to happen. Why me? How did that happen? I just need to get better soon. And, this pain is really frustrating. All the narrative that we add that gets us more and more and more like this. And to be able to, either through the body or through the mind or both, say, actually, it is as it is, and there is nothing I can do to change it. So can I just be with myself through this moment and hold myself through it? It's a huge skill. It's a huge,
Yes.
yeah.
And I'm so grateful for all of the years of meditation that I practiced. But still, even with all of my years of meditation, I still did that reaction at the beginning until I had my moment where I could say, the little voice in your head says, "What are you doing?"
Yeah, yeah,
I had turned up the volume on that little voice, my radio in the
yeah,
background, so that it was allowed to step into the room and say, "Stop doing that."
yeah. Yeah, it's funny. Sometimes I think there's almost this kind of something pops up that we can't really explain. Is it a thought? Is it a sensation? But we know what it means, and it says, "What are you doing?" Or- and it becomes an evidence at that moment. It's so obvious. Oh, of course. But it just takes us going through a little bit of a journey to then go, oh, yeah,
Right.
no
Yeah.
point doing that. So yeah, I think that's a really beautiful learning from a painful experience.
And
Yeah.
interestingly, this podcast became what it is now because of those 4 days. Because one of the messages that I got was, "Back to me."
Right. Of
Right?
course. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
then it was, how do I do that? How do I be back to me and help a broader community? And then I would say, I know what to do.
I'll speak to them. Yeah.
Yes.
And, again, if we go back to what we're talking about at the beginning, that's sort of outwardly focused, you know, there's this belief that being focused on ourselves is selfish and we feel guilty. But actually, I think everything, and that was what I learned through my experience as well, it all starts with you. And you have to have that resilience and inner stability within yourself, and that real sense of self-sustaining, self-nurturing rather than self-depleting and inner bullying. And then that really ripples across your well-being, how you interact with other people. When I talk about leadership, to me, it's really our way of being is a way of leading. So you being stable within yourself, in your home base, finding that home base of, this feels like I'm at home. That changes every one of your interactions, and you create a completely different impact in the world. I sometimes talk about the image of a dandelion. Use this kind of dandelion, and you blow on the little, I don't know what they call, little
Little
puffer bits.
puppies. Yes.
Yeah. And then they kind of spread around and they move around in the air until they settle somewhere, and you don't know where they land, but wherever they touch, that's your impact. And you with your podcast, you don't know who's listening, you don't know where it will land, but whoever is going to potentially get something that they just needed to hear. And just you being that way is having that beautiful impact. And I think that, to me, is leadership. Who am I being in the world? How am I showing up? If my way of being is a way of leading, am I leading in this way, in a way that I'm proud of? And I take leading very broadly, being a parent is leading, being a yoga teacher or a teacher is leading, being in a community and creating gatherings is leading, talking to the barista at the coffee shop, again, because it's through that resonance that we have with each other. So yeah, I think
That's
it's,
amazing. Yes, that's
yeah,
true. Leading can be anything.
yeah,
It's just I see leading as just being knowing in yourself who you are
yeah,
and being and showing that to the world. Because
yeah,
it's true, you don't know who's seeing or experiencing, even just experiencing you could change something for them, right?
absolutely. Maybe you could, you were talking about the carers in the hospital, but and this is still true for me now too, but particularly when I was in that really dark place, for me, going to get a coffee or going in a shop to get anything and having someone smile and acknowledge my presence or ask me a question or show the simplest act of kindness would, just as the thing would take me down a spiral, this would really fill my cup and make me feel seen and heard and acknowledged. And that went a long way. People wouldn't have realized. I remember the one time I used to go to that coffee shop a lot, and the barista just gave me a free coffee. And it was just, you would have thought I'd won the lottery. It was just so impactful to me, just the kindness of saying, you know what, you're always here, there, which to them, a cup of coffee is not much. And to me, it changed my day. So I think
Right?
it's, yeah, those little touch points are so important. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And I want to remember. So you have a program starting. I like the name of it, From Chaos to Calm, in January. And when does the sign up start for it, or is it already open?
So at the moment, the wait list is open, and I'll be opening the signups really soon. So anyone who's interested can go to my website and take a look. I'm sure you'll leave a link to it in the show notes. Um,
I can
and
never remember whether they're above or below or to the
yes,
side,
I
but
don't know.
the show notes
Um,
will be somewhere in the vicinity.
yes. Well, it's isabellegriffith.co.uk/chaos to calm if anyone wants to go before the show notes
Right.
are visible. And it's really about finding that sense of calm, stability within ourselves, even if the world feels chaotic. Just the premise that we don't have to be tied to how the world is moving up and down. And it's all that we talked about. So coming within ourselves and really anchoring ourselves in our own resilience, so that whatever happens in the world outside of us, we have that inner stability and we feel able to cope. So yes, it's very heavily anchored in embodiment and emotional resilience. And to me, there is an arc to going from being burnt out, stressed, overwhelmed to being what I would call an embodied feminine leader. And that first piece is really building that embodied resilience that can hold us to then go out and be that dandelion and have that impact. So this program is really that first piece of how can I find that place of anchoring within me.
You have to start at the beginning, right?
You
You
have
got
to start
you
at the beginning.
have
Yeah,
to
you
start
really
somewhere.
do.
Amazing.
Absolutely.
So, thank you so much, by the way, for all of this. I feel like we could keep talking, but I want to respect everyone's time.
Yeah,
It's,
yeah.
it's one of those conversations we could just keep going and going and going. But I want to thank you so much for bringing all of your wisdom and sharing your dandelion fluff with the world.
Oh, it's really my pleasure, Heather. Thank you so much for having
Yes.
me. It was
Thank
a really
you.
lovely conversation. And
Thank you.
I too wish we had hours, but yeah, it was a lovely conversation and
I'll
a
come
perfect
over
match.
and visit. I'll
That
come
would
over
be
and
lovely.
visit
I
at
would
the
love
coffee
that.
shop.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, my friend, if you want to pick up some of this dandelion fluff, check the show notes. They are somewhere, and definitely connect with Isabelle because I will tell you, being in a place of calm just feels so much better once you get there. Thank you so much. Have an amazing day. Take care. Hi, my friend. Thanks so much for listening to this entire podcast. If you found it useful and you're like me and you like helping others, please feel free to share this. Just give it a like, give it a comment. If you found something useful in it, there's a chance that someone else will find something useful as well. Also, if you have any questions at all, I can absolutely help, and I would love to help. You can email me at heather@prosperityflowcoaching.com. If you want more of this awesome content, you can follow me on Instagram, Heather Stewart Coaching. You can follow me on Facebook, Prosperity Flow Coaching. And I have a personal request. I want to help as many people as I can with these podcasts. And if you could give me a review, hopefully a good one, if you could share, if you could send this out into the world, I would truly appreciate it. I hope you have an amazing day, and I hope that you find your way to wellness by getting back to me. Take care, my friend.